Hello everyone, my name is Nives and I'm a mom to two girls. And this past year, I've left my career in order to stay home and homeschool my children. So welcome to my channel and I'm so glad you're here. Here we're talking about homeschooling, motherhood, some more serious things like faith and finding faith after a lifelong journey of atheism. And so those are all topics I'm going to be covering on my channel and I hope you stick around. If you're new here, please subscribe because that just encourages me to keep making these videos. All right, so today I wanted to talk about how integrating read alouds and especially the read aloud of classics has changed our family life and the life of my children. So over the past year, we've made a conscious effort to reduce our screen time and in doing so also increase our reading time as a family. So this is something I prioritize as a mother teacher because of the clear benefits that are outlined in so many books and so many studies. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend reading The Read Aloud Family by Sarah Mackenzie. She goes over all the benefits of the read aloud practice, and it's a wonderful read for those of us who are looking to increase our read aloud time with our children and reaping the benefits of this practice. So from the time to connect together as a family to raising intelligible children who can string two sentences together in a coherent fashion with vivid imaginations, the benefits are so many when it comes to why you should be integrating the read aloud practice in your home. But I will not be going over all of those. Instead, I'll be focusing on how it helped our family life and especially the changes I've seen in my own children. So when you're a homeschooler, the lines between home and school are very much blurred, which is a wonderful thing. And that means that our read aloud habit transcends our school time. It goes into our after school hours and it impacts our whole family too, which means that my husband can be involved. So years ago, when we only had a toddler and a newborn, my husband started doing this thing whenever we would go to a used bookshop where he would find and collect used classics. You know, he created a collection for my girls, and I remember at the time I didn't really think much of it. I was probably giving him a hard time because we were trying to declutter. We would be going to these places to declutter and find a few things that we might need, and then he would be bringing in all these books that we wouldn't be reading right away. But now I'm the one who benefits the most from them. Not only for myself, but obviously for my children too. I keep navigating to that library and seeing what read aloud we can get into next. I not only saw a change in myself, I saw a change in my children and in our family life too. So from the get-go, we've always read a lot as a family, but we weren't always diligent about what kind of books we would read. So we were under the impression that children's books had to be in board book format with dumbed down language. I don't know if that's exactly what our thought process was, but that's the kind of books we would acquire in the beginning. Books without a clear storyline, without any charismatic characters, with like big, bold, flashy language where it looked like the whole entire book was screaming at you. So that's the kind of books that I was reading to my firstborn when she was a toddler. And now, in contrast, our 2-year-old is sitting down and reading these more wholesome children's stories with us and also partaking in our classic reading habit, which is really beautiful. And then little by little, we swapped those books with more enriching children's books, ones that don't dumb down the words, ones that were actually illustrated by an artist as opposed to a robot or a software online, that have cohesion, that have a storyline to them with engaging characters, that have a moral to them. But it doesn't necessarily always have to have a moral, but you know, sometimes you just want your children to get lost in that imaginary world, and that's what the beauty of books is. So in that period, think Berenstain Bears or even Curious George or the illustrated version of The Wind in the Willows. We like the illustrated Little House on the Prairie series, which was rewritten in a childlike format. So it wasn't the original, which would fall under the classic category. And we became the kind of people that would, you know, go to the library and get out 20 to 30 books a week and have just as many to return every week. So that was really nice. We opened up our home to so many different kinds of books. So I do spend a lot of time looking into what kind of books we're going to be bringing into our home, books that tie nicely with the curriculum we're using or the thing we're learning at the moment, or the seasonal activities that we're partaking in, or, just the seasonality of what's happening around us. And then came the fairy tales and the daily practice of reading the Aesop's Fables, which we do as part of our morning basket, and the regular practice also of reading the Bible together. So all of that, Aesop's Fables, the Bible, the wholesome children's stories, and the fairy tales, they just brought so much joy and life into our homeschool and into our family life. And then we integrated the classics. And it's impossible for me to talk about bringing in the classics without talking about the world of classical education, because that's where it all started for me. Classical education seeks after truth, goodness, and beauty, the most important of concepts. And those same ideas are part of the Charlotte Mason education. That's what the entire educational philosophy is built upon, cultivating those concepts. And so the more knowledge I acquired about those classical concepts, the more I felt guided and in a way empowered to bring those concepts into our daily life and knowing how to do so. Reading aloud together was not the only way that we get to bring truth, goodness, and beauty in our life, but it's one of those ways that better our family, our home, our minds. And one day, without quite expecting it or meaning for it to happen, things feel slightly different. Something changes for the best. Things that used to take practice or intentionality and preparation are now more second nature. So suddenly reading by candlelight on a Tuesday night is something you do regularly rather than, truly trying to put in the effort to do that. Atmosphere is made up of things we do on a daily basis, right? And so having prioritized the read aloud of classics and of beautiful books, stories, poems, the Bible, it's changed the whole atmosphere of our home, and it became part of our family culture too. Cuddling up with our children as we read a beautiful story with them, or sitting across from them at the dinner table when they eat their breakfast and reading out loud to them is just such a nice way for us to bond with them. And it's taken us away from the passive parenting of plunking our kids in front of the TV and really engaging them by being the one who reads to them and letting ourselves also daydream, just like children do. I don't think that adults can ever get back to the childlike state of sitting and really being immersed in the world of imagination through toys or through sticks and stones. But when you're reading such beautiful stories, that's, I think, the closest you can get to that state. And it's wonderful that we get to share that state with our kids. Classics in particular are so descriptive of the natural world that you can't read a passage about the beauty and the fragility of flowers or the vastness of a starry night and be left untouched and unchanged. So these books describe perfectly the natural world, which is responsible for all the beauty around us. And as the reader, you can't not take that out with you when you close the book. It follows you long after you're done with the story. And for my children, these stories present them with the right kind of heroes to aspire to be like and look up to. We recently finished reading Heidi, and Heidi's goodness and contagious selflessness was just so evident throughout the book that when we closed the book down and I asked my daughter to describe Heidi to me, she would describe those traits to me in her own words, of course. But that's because the book speaks for itself. There's no gray area. It's very evident what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. It's laid out in front of our children so they get a sense of the goodness and the truth and the beauty of the world. And oftentimes these books are filled with tragedies, with hardships that these characters are going through at a young age. And there's frequent mention of death, of loss, of life-altering circumstances. But yet the characters show resilience, they show perseverance and grace. And there's always a sense of redemption. Like even those characters with the less desirable traits, like for example, in the example of Heidi, her uncle, he's basically given up on people and, has shown a rather unpleasant side to himself, but he gets redeemed, there is change that happens and you see goodness persevere over the bad, right? So I feel like those books are just so enriching for the soul. You see the impact that human kindness can have from beginning to end through these books. We've also started reading the Chronicles of Narnia, something I've never read until I picked it up with my children. And now we're halfway through Anne of Green Gables. And again, I have a sneaking suspicion that my daughter has taken to Anne's rambly, dreamy ways, because every time we finish a chapter, she asks to read just one more, just one more. So besides the soul-filling content that comes with reading classics and that I've noticed my children getting privy to, I've also noticed a number of more practical habits ever since we reduced the screen time and integrated read alouds, and particularly classics. I mentioned screen time because genuinely the two habits of reading aloud and reducing screen time go hand in hand. I just don't think they would have been as interested if their screen time was what it used to be. One change I noticed is in their attention span. I would say that the habit of attentiveness has started a while before we even started reading classics. It probably started with read alouds in itself of children's stories and books. I remember one time after dinner, my then newly 2-year-old and newly 4-year-old were sitting around the table with my husband and listening to Curious George stories an hour after we had finished dinner. And they were just so content and so happy and asking for more stories. And I remember how impressed I was with them. I was thinking, how is that even possible? Never did I think that they would be capable of sitting down for such a long period of time, and yet there we were. So we started slow, a book here, a book there, peppered throughout the day. And then, don't get me wrong, they didn't start off sitting down for an hour at a time. It was a slow process, and there were many growing pains along the way, but I do think that the growing pains are something you have to go through, and I think obviously they're so worth it. My kids have never had an exuberant amount of screen time, but they've had enough where it would impact their attention span and also just their moods in general. And I still see a difference now in their mood or their attention span when we reintegrate a little bit too much or too frequent screen time. And the less TV they watch, the more they cared to watch it and the more they cared about books. I truly think that reducing the screen time has led them to develop this capacity to sit and want to take in the books. I don't think they would have been able to do it if screens were just freely available. And now my 2-year-old can sit through a book longer than she can sit through a movie. The habit of attentiveness has also transcended the book reading and gone into many other areas of their life, like their play, for example, which is now more self-sufficient. It's more cooperative. I see them using their imagination more. Another place for attentiveness is whenever we're outdoors. It's so obvious to me at that point. My eldest is constantly listening for birds, noticing bird sounds, being able to identify them, observing and noticing little things that before we might have just passed by and not taken a second glance at. But now we get really immersed in it. And again, I think that's the benefit of developing that attentiveness habit. And speaking of play, a huge benefit I see is the imagination in their play. And as Anne would say, these books truly allow for a scope for imagination. And that's just a wonderful thing because you see it in practicality after that. Their play has gotten way more imaginative. They have different characters, different character traits being built in their play. They also navigate to being outside more, using the natural world more as their playground. But yeah, I find my eldest more willing and wanting to, assemble sticks and branches and gather stones and make different habitats and bear dens, and it's just really fun. When it comes to play also, we used to be a Paw Patrol family. We are still a Paw Patrol family to a certain degree because my kids do like those characters. But there was a point in time when all their play was just centered around Paw Patrol characters, Paw Patrol missions, the lookout, etc., etc. And now obviously it's expanded beyond that. And that made me think of a passage I've read, I don't have it in front of me, in 10 Ways to Destroy the Imagination of Your Child by Anthony Esolen, where he describes that very thing. When your children are referencing characters from movies or TV shows in their play, and that's what their play is based upon, they're not using their imagination. Their imagination is very much dulled out, and we need to do something about that. So I'm really glad that I read that book just as we were getting into the read aloud, because oh my goodness, I felt so much guilt that that's exactly what I was seeing at play. when I was reading that passage. Okay, so another thing I've noticed is the expansion of my children's vocabulary, especially in my eldest. I see it in my 2-year-old, but she's a toddler, so it's not as evident as it is in my 4.5-year-old. But when I first opened Anne of Green Gables and read, let me read it to you. Okay. Mrs. Rachel Lynde lived just where the Avonlea main road dipped into a little hollow fringed with alders and ladies' eardrops and traversed by a brook that had its source away back in the woods of the old Cuthbert place. It was reputed to be an intricate, headlong brook in its earliest course through those woods, with dark secrets of pool and cascade. But by the time it reached Lynn's Hollow, it was a quiet, well-conducted little stream, for not even a brook could run past Mrs. Rachel Lynde's door without due regard for decency and decorum. Okay, the sentence is not even done, but you get the gist. So when I first read that, I closed the book down and I decided that nope, we're gonna wait, we're not gonna read this one. And my daughter, of course, curious about what made me close the book down, immediately said, okay, no, we're gonna be reading this book. Can you please open it and read it out to us? So read it out I did. And now here we are, we're over halfway through and they love Anne. And I'm so glad we kept reading, because after a little while, the unusualness of the Old English and the long forgotten words becomes more and more usual, and you become more and more familiar with it and more comfortable as we read. And my 4-year-old started using certain words that I've never heard us use before, or turns of sentences that she wasn't saying before. And I attribute that to her reading these books at such a young age, where it can have such an impact on her vocabulary and on her way of speaking. So full disclosure, English is not my first or even my second language, it's my third. But I do think that even an English speaker would have to stop and look a lot of these words up, or, struggle through certain sentences that are lengthier than others. But how wonderful is that our learning is never done and we get to learn our whole life. I wanted to share this experience because we've had so many wonderful and unexpected benefits of integrating the read aloud time in our family. And it's been such a blessing to us. And if this video can convince one family to start reading more books, to cut out more screen time, I think my job is done. And it will be worth it. And don't be intimidated. Don't be intimidated to start. Don't think that your children are too young for it. They are not. You can get started and they will be growing up with this practice, which is a beautiful thing. Thank you so much for being here once again. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe. That just encourages me to keep making these videos and talking to my camera. And I will see you in my next video. Bye.